Welcome to one of the most disturbing unsolved cases in the history of the American West. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from, and the exact time you are listening to this narration. We are interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the spring of 1919, the Blackwell Cattle Company organized what should have been a routine cattle drive from the rangelands of the Texas Panhandle to the railhead at Amarillo. The drive would cover approximately 200 miles across open prairie, following routes that had been used for decades. 37 men signed on for the drive, most of them experienced cowboys who had worked cattle drives before, some for 20 years or more. They were equipped with everything necessary for 3 weeks on the trail: adequate horses, ample supplies, weapons for protection, and knowledge of the land, passed down through generations of ranchers and cowboys. Yet within 2 weeks, only 12 men would complete the journey. 25 died or disappeared under circumstances that law enforcement and military investigators could not explain. Cattle were found dead in ways that made no sense. Equipment failed impossibly, and the survivors brought back accounts so disturbing that several were accused of fabricating stories to cover up crimes, though no evidence of wrongdoing was ever found. What happened on the Texas plains during those 2 weeks in spring 1919 remains one of the most baffling mysteries in the history of the American cattle industry. What follows is a reconstruction based on trail journals kept by the drive boss, testimony from the 12 survivors, newspaper reports, military investigation records declassified in 1975, and interviews conducted decades later with those who lived through the experience. The official explanation blamed the deaths on a combination of severe weather, disease, and possible bandit attacks. But the evidence tells a far stranger story, one that involves phenomena the investigators could not explain, could not fit into their understanding of how the world works, could not acknowledge without questioning their most fundamental assumptions about reality. This is the story of the Blackwell Cattle Drive of 1919, and why certain sections of the Texas Panhandle are still avoided by ranchers who know the history, who remember the warnings passed down from those who witnessed the impossible, who understand that some places on the Great Plains hold dangers that cannot be rationalized away or defeated with modern technology. The Texas Panhandle in 1919 was still frontier country in many respects. The great cattle drives of the 1870s and 1880s had ended, replaced by ranches and fenced ranges, but the land itself remained vast, harsh, and largely empty. Towns were scattered and small, separated by miles of grassland where a man could ride for days without seeing another human being. The weather was extreme. Scorching summers and bitter winters with sudden storms that could kill livestock and men with equal indifference. It was country that demanded respect, and those who worked it learned quickly to read the signs, to understand when the land was offering warnings. The Blackwell Cattle Company was owned by Thomas Blackwell, a third-generation Texas rancher whose family had operated in the Panhandle since the 1870s. By 1919, Blackwell owned approximately 50,000 acres and ran several thousand head of cattle. The spring drive to Amarillo was an annual event, moving cattle from winter pasture to market. It was well organized, profitable, and normally uneventful. Thomas Blackwell himself did not go on drives anymore. He was 63 and left such work to younger men, but he selected the crew carefully and hired the best trail boss available. That trail boss was James "Jim" Holloway, a 48-year-old cowboy who had been working cattle since he was 12. Holloway was known throughout the Panhandle as a man who could handle any situation, who kept his crew safe, who always got the cattle to market regardless of weather or difficulty. He was quiet, competent, and absolutely reliable. Blackwell trusted him completely, which made what happened all the more inexplicable. Holloway assembled a crew of 36 men, plus himself, to handle 1,800 head of cattle. Most of the crew were Blackwell Company regulars, cowboys who worked the ranch year-round and signed on for drives as part of their employment. There were also some seasonal workers, men who moved from ranch to ranch following work. All were experienced. The youngest was 19, the oldest was 62. They knew cattle, knew horses, knew the land. They were not novices or city men playing at cowboy life. They were professionals doing a job they had done many times before. The drive departed the Blackwell Ranch on April 3, 1919. The cattle were in good condition, the horses were sound, supplies were adequate, and the weather forecast was favorable. Holloway planned to average about 10 miles per day, a conservative pace that would not stress the cattle or the men. They would follow the Canadian River Valley for much of the journey, ensuring water access, and would swing north toward Amarillo in the final days. It was a route Holloway had taken before without incident. He had no reason to expect problems. Holloway kept a trail journal, a common practice for drive bosses who needed to document events for ranch owners. This journal, recovered after the disaster and preserved in the archives of the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum, provides the most detailed account of what happened during those 2 weeks. The early entries are routine, noting miles covered, condition of cattle and horses, weather observations, minor incidents that required attention. April 4th, made good time today, approximately 11 miles. Cattle moving well, no stragglers. Weather clear and warm. Creek crossing went smoothly. Men in good spirits, no concerns to report. The first indication that something might be wrong came on April 6th. Holloway noted, found 3 steers dead this morning. No obvious cause, no injuries, no signs of disease. Animals appeared healthy yesterday. Chuck Ramirez, who has 20 years' experience with cattle, says he has never seen anything like it. Hearts just stopped, he says. Have separated carcasses from herd as precaution. We'll monitor other cattle closely. 3 dead cattle was concerning but not necessarily alarming. Disease, poisonous plants, various natural causes could kill livestock. But what Holloway did not write in his journal, but mentioned later in testimony, was the strange smell around the dead cattle. Not the smell of death or decay, but something else, something acrid and bitter that made men's eyes water and caused horses to shy away. April 7th brought more dead cattle. 7 steers were found dead in different parts of the herd, scattered rather than grouped together, suggesting this was not disease spreading from animal to animal. Again, no obvious causes. The animals appeared to have simply stopped living, hearts ceasing, life ending for no discernible reason. Holloway's journal entry shows growing concern. 10 cattle dead in 2 days. This is unprecedented in my experience. Have consulted with experienced hands. No one can explain it. Cattle do not just die like this. Something is wrong, but I cannot identify what. That night, April 7th, the crew experienced the first of what would become recurring incidents. The cattle, normally calm at night when bedded down, became agitated around midnight. All 1,800 head rose simultaneously, a behavior that was highly unusual. They did not stampede, they did not run, they simply stood, all facing the same direction, toward the northeast, staring at something the cowboys could not see. The night guards tried to settle the herd, riding among the cattle, speaking in the low, calm tones that usually soothe nervous animals. But the cattle would not respond. They stood motionless, staring for nearly an hour. Then, as suddenly as it began, the behavior stopped. The cattle lay back down and resumed normal rest. Holloway recorded this incident, but had no explanation for it. He wrote, "Entire herd behaved in manner I have never witnessed. All animals oriented in same direction, staring at empty prairie. Checked for wolf or other predator that might spook them. Found nothing. Wind direction wrong for them to have scented anything to northeast. Most experienced hands equally puzzled. Old man Carson, who has 40 years with cattle, says in all his time he never saw a herd behave exactly this way. The strange behavior repeated the next 3 nights. Each time around midnight, the cattle would rise, face northeast, stare for an hour, then resume rest. The cowboys began to find it deeply unnerving. Cattle are creatures of simple instincts. When they react to something, there is always a cause. A predator, a storm, a fire, something tangible. But these cattle were reacting to nothing the men could detect. And the consistency of the behavior, same time, same direction, same duration, suggested pattern and purpose that cattle should not possess. April 10th brought the first human casualty. A cowboy named William Torres was found dead in his bedroll that morning. Like the cattle that had been dying, there was no obvious cause. Torres had been healthy, had eaten normally the previous evening, had shown no signs of illness. He simply died during the night. The cook, an older man named Samuel Harrison, who had served as a medic during the Spanish-American War, examined the body and could find nothing wrong. No disease symptoms, no injuries, no indication of what had stopped Torres's heart. Harrison recorded the death in his own notes as unexplained cardiac failure in apparently healthy male, age approximately 35 years. Torres was buried on the prairie, as was common practice when men died on trail drives. A wooden cross marked the location so family could later arrange for proper burial if they chose. The drive continued, but the mood had shifted. Men were frightened, though most tried not to show it. Cowboys were supposed to be tough, unconcerned with danger, ready to face whatever came. But unexplained deaths, cattle staring at nothing, something wrong in ways no one could articulate. These things eroded confidence and courage. That night, April 10th, the phenomenon escalated. At midnight, as had become routine, the cattle rose and faced northeast. But this time the cowboys saw something. On the horizon, perhaps 2 miles distant, lights appeared. Not campfires or lanterns, but cold, blue-white lights that moved across the prairie in patterns that seemed deliberate. The lights would cluster, separate, form lines, form circles, all while moving with a speed that no human-carried light source could match. They persisted for the full hour that the cattle remained standing, then vanished as the cattle lay back down. Holloway sent 2 riders, experienced men named Carl Jensen and Patrick Murphy, to investigate the lights at first dawn. They rode northeast for 5 miles, farther than the lights had appeared to be, and found nothing. No tracks, no evidence of human presence, no indication that anyone had been on that section of prairie. The land was empty, undisturbed, as if the lights had been projected from nowhere or from the sky itself. Holloway's journal entry for April 11th reveals his growing alarm. Lights on prairie last night. Entire crew witnessed them. Sent men to investigate at dawn. Found nothing. Weather remains clear. No atmospheric conditions that might explain unusual light phenomena. Cattle continued daily deaths. Lost 4 more head last night. Men becoming superstitious. Have overheard talk of spirits and curses. Must maintain discipline and rational perspective, but I confess I am at a loss to explain what we are experiencing. The situation deteriorated rapidly over the next 3 days. More cattle died each night, the number increasing from 3 or 4 to 8 or 10. The lights appeared every night at midnight, growing brighter and closer, and men began to disappear. On April 12th, a young cowboy named Thomas Walsh vanished during his watch shift. He had been riding the perimeter of the herd, a routine patrol that dozens of cowboys did every night of every drive. When the next shift came on at 3 a.m., Walsh was gone. His horse was found grazing calmly, saddles still in place, but Walsh had disappeared. A search at dawn found no trace. No body, no clothing, no indication of what had happened. Walsh had simply ceased to exist at some point during his watch. Holloway recorded, T. Walsh missing as of 3 a.m. Extensive search conducted at first light. Found nothing, no tracks suggesting he walked away. No signs of struggle. Horse undisturbed. This makes no sense. Man cannot simply vanish from horseback without leaving some trace. Crew morale declining significantly. Some men talking about turning back. I am beginning to wonder if we should. But turning back presented its own problems. They were approximately halfway to Amarillo, over 100 miles from the ranch. Going forward or backward was roughly equal in distance, and there was pride involved. The cowboys sensed that running from trouble was cowardly, that real men faced problems rather than fleeing. Holloway made the decision to continue, to push forward as quickly as possible, to get the cattle to Amarillo and end this cursed drive. It was a decision he would regret for the rest of his life. April 13th brought multiple disappearances. 3 cowboys, James Whitmore, Daniel Roberts, and Henry Adams, vanished during daylight hours while riding flank positions on the herd. They had been visible to other crew members, riding their assigned positions, performing their duties. Then they were not there. Multiple witnesses reported the same thing. The men did not ride away, did not fall from their horses, did not do anything unusual. They were simply there one moment and gone the next, as if erased from reality. Their horses were found wandering, riderless but otherwise undisturbed. A massive search involving the entire crew found nothing. No tracks leading away from the herd. No signs of struggle. No indication of what had happened to 3 grown men on horseback in open country, where visibility extended for miles. Holloway's journal entry is brief and shaken. Lost 3 men in daylight. Multiple witnesses. No explanation. This is beyond my experience or understanding. Continuing to Amarillo, but I fear we will lose more before we arrive. God help us all. That night, the lights came closer. Instead of appearing on the horizon, they manifested within the camp itself, moving among the wagons and the bedded cattle, weaving between cowboys who stood frozen, watching, unable or unwilling to approach. The lights were cold, generating no heat, casting no shadows in normal ways. When they passed near lanterns or campfires, the flames would dim or flicker out entirely, and in the lights, the cowboys claimed to see shapes, figures that walked upright but were wrong in proportion. Too tall and too thin, moving with a grace that seemed to mock human clumsiness. Several men fired their rifles at the shapes. The bullets passed through without effect, without even disturbing the lights that outlined the figures. The shapes continued their movement through the camp for nearly an hour, apparently observing, studying, evaluating. Then, as midnight passed, they faded and disappeared, leaving the camp in darkness and the cowboys in terror. By morning of April 14th, 5 more men were dead, not disappeared, dead, found in their bedrolls with the same lack of obvious cause that had killed the cattle and William Torres. 5 healthy men, ages ranging from 22 to 54, all dead without injury or illness. Hearts simply stopped during the night. And the cattle losses had accelerated dramatically. Over 300 head were found dead that morning, scattered throughout the herd. No pattern to their deaths, except that all had died during the night when the lights had been in camp. Holloway called a meeting. The remaining 27 men gathered, and for the first time, the trail boss admitted he did not know what to do. They could continue to Amarillo, still about 5 days away at normal pace. They could try to return to the ranch, roughly equal distance. Or they could abandon the cattle and ride hard for the nearest town, which was Clarendon, about 30 miles to the south. Each option had risks. Continuing meant enduring more nights, more lights, more deaths. Returning meant the same. Abandoning the cattle meant violating professional obligations and possibly losing employment. But it meant moving fast, covering ground quickly, potentially outpacing whatever was killing them. The crew voted. 20 men voted to abandon the cattle and ride for Clarendon. 7 voted to continue to Amarillo. Holloway sided with the majority. At noon on April 14th, the crew saddled their fastest horses, took minimal supplies, and rode south, leaving 1,800 head of cattle standing on the prairie, attended by no one, guarded by no one, simply abandoned. They rode hard, pushing the horses as much as they dared, covering 30 miles in 6 hours. They should have reached Clarendon by evening. They did not. As the sun set, they found themselves still on open prairie with no sign of the town. Holloway's compass indicated they were heading south, but landmarks did not match his memory of the terrain. They had ridden through this country before, should have recognized features, should have been able to orient themselves, but the land looked wrong. Distances seemed distorted, and Clarendon remained impossibly absent. They camped that night in a small depression that offered some shelter from wind. They built no fires, wanting to remain as inconspicuous as possible. They posted guards in shifts, and they waited for midnight, knowing from experience that midnight was when the phenomena manifested. They were not disappointed, or rather, they were disappointed in the worst possible way. At midnight exactly, the lights appeared, but not at a distance this time. They formed a circle around the camp, surrounding the 27 men, trapping them in a ring of cold luminescence. And in the lights, the shapes became clearer, more defined. The cowboys saw them now with terrible clarity. Tall figures, perhaps 8 or 9 feet in height, impossibly thin, with limbs that bent in wrong places and heads that were oddly proportioned. The figures stood at the circle's edge, motionless, watching, waiting. One man, a young cowboy named Edward Collins, panicked. He spurred his horse and tried to break through the circle, to ride through the lights and escape. Horse and rider entered the luminescence and simply disappeared. There was no flash, no sound, no violence. Collins and his horse rode into the light and ceased to exist. The other men watched in horror, understanding now that they were trapped, that running was futile, that they were being held by something beyond their ability to fight or flee. The standoff continued for 3 hours. The lights maintained their circle. The figures remained at their posts. The cowboys stayed clustered together, some praying, some weeping, some simply staring in shock. Then at 3 a.m., the lights faded and the figures vanished. The circle broke. The cowboys were free, but 6 men were gone. Not just Collins, who had tried to escape, but 5 others who had been in the center of the group, surrounded by companions, who had vanished during the 3-hour ordeal without anyone seeing them go. 20 men remained. At dawn, they rode south again, desperate now, no longer caring about direction or destination. Simply fleeing. They became separated during the day, groups splitting as horses took different paths, as men made individual decisions about which direction offered safety. By evening of April 15th, the 20 survivors had fragmented into 4 groups, scattered across miles of prairie. 3 of these groups, totaling 16 men, disappeared that night. They were never seen again, never found despite extensive searches conducted later. Their fate remains unknown, though the 12 survivors who reached civilization have consistent theories about what happened to them. The 4th group, consisting of Jim Holloway and 3 other cowboys, rode through the night, not stopping, not resting, pushing their horses to the breaking point. They reached Clarendon at dawn on April 16th, more than 40 hours after abandoning the cattle drive, exhausted, dehydrated, and barely coherent. The 4 survivors told their story to the Clarendon sheriff, who immediately organized a rescue party. 20 men rode north to search for the missing cowboys and to investigate what had happened to the cattle drive. They found the abandoned herd still standing where the crew had left them, nearly 1,500 head remaining alive. The dead cattle, over 500 of them, lay scattered around the herd. They found no trace of the missing cowboys, no bodies, no equipment, no indication of where the men had gone. The rescue party also reported strange phenomena. Several men claimed to see lights moving on the horizon at night. Others reported feeling watched, sensing hostile presence, though they saw nothing definite. The party completed their work quickly, gathering the surviving cattle and driving them to Amarillo with a speed that suggested fear rather than efficiency. None of the rescue party wanted to spend more time than necessary in that section of the Panhandle. News of the disaster spread quickly. The Amarillo Daily News ran a front-page story on April 20th, with the headline "Cattle Drive Ends in Tragedy. 25 men missing, hundreds of cattle dead." The story was picked up by newspapers across Texas and eventually reached national attention. The disappearance of 25 men from a cattle drive was unprecedented, inexplicable, and demanded investigation. The Texas Rangers sent investigators. The United States Army, which maintained posts in the region, dispatched officers to interview survivors and search for the missing men. Private detectives hired by families of the disappeared combed the area. All found nothing. The 4 survivors, Jim Holloway, and cowboys named Michael Chin, Robert Taylor, and Samuel Morrison, told consistent stories about lights, figures, and men vanishing. But their accounts were so strange that many suspected fabrication, possibly covering up crimes or explaining failures. Holloway in particular was suspected of mismanagement leading to deaths that he then tried to explain with fantastic stories. He was questioned extensively by Rangers and Army investigators. His trail journal was examined for inconsistencies. His background was investigated for any history of mental illness or dishonesty. Nothing problematic was found. Jim Holloway was exactly what he appeared to be: an experienced, reliable trail boss who had encountered something beyond his ability to handle or explain. The military investigation, conducted by Army Captain Richard Hayes, was the most thorough. Hayes spent 3 weeks interviewing survivors, examining the area where the drive had taken place, and trying to construct a rational explanation for events. His final report, declassified in 1975 and now available in National Archives, concludes, "After extensive investigation, I am unable to determine definitive cause for the high number of casualties experienced by the Blackwell cattle drive. Survivors provide consistent accounts of unusual light phenomena and mass disappearances. However, these accounts describe events that have no basis in accepted science or military experience. Possible explanations include: 1. Environmental factors such as gas emissions from underground sources causing hallucinations and asphyxiation. 2. Coordinated attacks by unknown hostile forces using technology or tactics unfamiliar to investigators. 3. Mass hysteria leading to poor decisions and accidental deaths. None of these explanations adequately accounts for all evidence. Recommend area be monitored for similar incidents, and that cattle operations avoid this section of Panhandle until definitive causes can be established." Hayes's private notes, also declassified, are more revealing. "I have investigated crimes, accidents, and military actions across my career. This case is unlike anything I have encountered. The survivors are not lying. They witnessed something that I cannot explain within my framework of understanding. The consistency of their accounts, the physical evidence of mass cattle deaths with no discernible cause, and my own observations of unusual light phenomena during investigation suggest that something extraordinary occurred. I am unwilling to officially conclude that the causes are beyond conventional explanation, as such a conclusion would damage my credibility and career. But privately, I believe we encountered something in that section of Texas that does not fit into our understanding of natural law. I recommend that the area be avoided. The survivors faced difficult lives after the drive. All four lost their employment with the Blackwell Cattle Company. Not as punishment, but because Thomas Blackwell himself had sold his ranch and retired following the disaster. The loss of cattle and men had devastated him financially and psychologically. He died in 1921, reportedly never recovering from guilt over deaths that occurred on his operation, even though he bore no direct responsibility. Jim Holloway never worked as a trail boss again. He took a job as a ranch hand in New Mexico, far from the Panhandle, and spoke rarely about the drive. When asked about the 25 men who disappeared, he would say only, "They were taken by something we have no name for, something that lives on the plains and does not want humans there. That is all I know and all I will say." Holloway died in 1934, and his obituary made no mention of the 1919 cattle drive, though everyone in the ranching community knew who he was and what he had survived. Michael Chen moved to California and never returned to Texas. Robert Taylor became a railroad worker, choosing an occupation that kept him in towns and cities, away from open country. Samuel Morrison continued as a working cowboy, but refused assignments that took him anywhere near the Central Panhandle. All three survivors declined to discuss the drive publicly, though family members later reported that the men had nightmares for years, dreams of lights surrounding them, of figures watching from darkness, of companions vanishing while screaming for help. The section of the Texas Panhandle where the drive had taken place developed a reputation. Ranchers began avoiding it, routing drives around it, even though doing so added days to journey times. Cowboys who had been hired to work cattle in that area would refuse, forfeiting pay rather than entering what came to be called the dead zone or the taking grounds. The names were not official, did not appear on maps, but everyone in the ranching community knew what they meant. In the decades following 1919, there were periodic reports from the area that echoed the cattle drive experiences. Travelers on the few roads that crossed the region reported seeing lights at night, hearing sounds that had no source, feeling observed by presences they could not locate. Several people disappeared, vanishing while driving through the area, their vehicles found abandoned with no sign of the drivers. Most notably, in 1947, a military aircraft flying over the Panhandle reported unusual lights below them. The pilot descended to investigate and lost radio contact. The plane was found crashed 3 days later, but the crew of 4 was never located despite extensive searches. Researchers have attempted to explain the 1919 cattle drive disaster using various theories. Some have suggested natural gas releases creating asphyxiation zones and hallucinations. Others have proposed ball lightning or other rare atmospheric phenomena. A few have theorized that the drive encountered a group of criminals or hostile indigenous peoples using fear tactics to rob or kill, though no evidence of such groups was ever found. Each theory explains some elements but fails to account for the complete picture. The consistency of the lights appearing at midnight, the cattle deaths with no medical cause, the mass disappearances of men in open country where visibility extended for miles, and the ongoing phenomena in the same region over decades. The most controversial theory, rarely published in mainstream sources but discussed in fringe research circles, suggests that certain locations on the Great Plains are what some indigenous cultures called thin places, areas where the boundary between our reality and something else grows permeable. According to this theory, the cattle drive had entered such a place and encountered entities or forces that exist in that other reality, entities that became aware of the human and animal presence and responded with hostility or curiosity, taking specimens, studying them, perhaps consuming them. This theory is dismissed by mainstream researchers as pseudoscience and fantasy, but it is worth noting that Comanche, Kiowa, and Apache peoples who historically inhabited the Texas Panhandle all had traditions about certain areas of the plains that should not be entered, particularly at night. They spoke of spirit grounds where the boundaries between worlds were thin, where beings from elsewhere could manifest. When white settlers moved into the region in the mid-1800s, these warnings were dismissed as superstition. The 1919 cattle drive was not the first time people died or disappeared in that section of the Panhandle. It was simply the most dramatic and well-documented incident. Today, the area where the Blackwell cattle drive met disaster is largely empty. A few ranch roads cross it, but no major highways. No towns have developed there despite it being in a region where population has otherwise grown. Google Maps shows it as blank space with few labels or features. Ranchers who work in the general region know to avoid that specific section, though they often cannot articulate exactly why. Only that it is understood among those who work the land that some places are better left alone. The mysteries that haunt the Texas Panhandle today are the same mysteries that destroyed the Blackwell cattle drive in 1919. Lights still appear in that region at night, seen by occasional travelers who report them to authorities, and are usually dismissed as misidentifying aircraft or stars. People still disappear, with several unsolved missing persons cases in the past century involving individuals last seen traveling through that area. And ranchers still tell stories, passed down from those who remember when it happened, about the drive where 25 men were taken by something no one could fight or escape. Something that lives on the plains and enforces boundaries that humans ignore at their peril. If you ever find yourself traveling through the Texas Panhandle, if you drive those empty roads that cross endless miles of grass and sky, if you camp under the vast darkness of a plains night, remember the Blackwell cattle drive. Remember that 37 men set out to move cattle to market, doing work they had done many times before, and 25 of them never came home. Remember that their bodies were never found, that the causes of the cattle deaths were never explained, that survivors spent the rest of their lives haunted by what they witnessed. And if you see lights moving across the prairie at midnight, lights that move with purpose and intelligence, lights that form patterns and circles, do not investigate. Do not approach. Leave the area as quickly as possible, because whatever took those 25 cowboys in 1919 is still there, still watching from the grass and the darkness, still enforcing boundaries that existed long before humans walked the plains and will exist long after humans are gone. The Texas Panhandle is vast and beautiful and empty in ways that city dwellers can barely comprehend. But that emptiness is not absence. It is presence, ancient and patient, waiting in the grass and the wind and the endless sky. The cowboys of the Blackwell Drive learned this truth too late. Do not make their mistake. Some mysteries are best left unsolved, because solving them requires getting too close to forces that do not acknowledge human authority or human understanding. The Great Plains remember, and they do not forgive those who ignore the warnings.